branching off into many parts of my work. But I did include them in the book Jesus and the Essenes because I wanted people to know that these things were accepted during that time. All right, and in the book Jesus and the Essenes, after the Star of Bethlehem, I took her forward in time, and I began asking more questions about the star, and that's when she said that it remained in the sky for 2 months. And she talked about the magi, and the magi were astrologers. In the Bible it calls them wise men, but they were astrologers. And they had also seen the same charts that they had seen at the Essenes to know that on this time, in this certain time period, is when the Messiah would be born. So they all knew from the charts about where it was going to be. And she said each wise man or each magi followed one of the lights, one of the stars, and they were to meet where they all came together. And so they came from different parts of the country. And there were supposed to have been 4. You know, ours come down to us, there were only 3 wise men. She said there was supposed to have been 4, one of them that would follow each one of these stars. And, you know, this time of the year, we do hear the stories of the 4th wise man. There have been some stories on TV saying they think there might have been a 4th wise man. According to what Sudi was telling me at the time of the Essenes, they knew there was supposed to have been a 4th one, and no one knew what happened to him because he didn't make it to the meeting point when the other 3 all gathered up there to decide what they were going to do from there. And the story of going to the palace looking for the new baby was true because they didn't know where else to go. All of that part is true, and the part about the killing of the babies. There are many parts that are true in the Bible, and then according to her, and then there were other stories that went off in different directions. But I think that's very fitting right now, as we're so close to Christmas, to tell what she said was the actual Star of Bethlehem, which still remains a mystery, even with her telling of it, and the 4 wise men that came looking for the baby. Now, when she was at Qumran, she did see the baby whenever Mary and Joseph came to flee. They were fleeing when the killing of the babies by Herod. And John the Baptist and Mary, and there's another story about Elizabeth and John the Baptist and Zacharias. In the beginning, when I started getting this information, I thought I would be able to find all of the verification in the Bible. I thought all I had to do was check the Bible. In my research, I would find all of my answers there. Well, that wasn't true. I didn't even find half of the answers there. I tried, but the things I found a whole lot more from my own work that filled in the gaps. There were just too many gaps in the whole story. There's another book that I found a lot more information that filled a lot of the gaps. This book is called The Aquarian Gospel, which is a very old book. The Aquarian Gospel filled in a lot of the parts that I thought could have been in the Bible. But when they were going to Egypt, they had to flee to get away from the soldiers that were looking for all the babies. Because of the census, they had an idea what children were born and pretty much where to find them. So Mary and Joseph took the baby and were fleeing. Well, where else are they going to go? Joseph and Mary were Essenes, and they were taught at Qumran. They went to the school there. So naturally, when it came time to flee, they came and stopped at Qumran on their way to Egypt. And it was at that time that Sudi was able to see the baby for the first time. And he said it was not like any normal baby that he had ever seen. He said it didn't cry, it was very quiet, and he said he had the most beautiful eyes. He said as though the eyes could see beyond the world. And he was so impressed by seeing this young baby Jesus. But he didn't know that after they went to Egypt and came back, that he was going to be the teacher of Jesus. So this happened whenever they brought the children back, and John the Baptist joined them. They were just young boys at that time, and Sadi was teaching both of them. And he said it was quite amazing, because this is another thing people don't realize. Jesus was red-haired with blue eyes, and John the Baptist was fiery red hair with blue eyes. It's not exactly the picture that we have had of them all along. But people say, how could that be? They're all dark in that part of the world. Well, as I asked these questions, I found out that around Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, there were a lot of blonde people and a lot of red-haired people during that time period when they were living there. The dark skin color and the hair color didn't come in for many, many generations later when they had the intermarriage between those from the south of Africa when they moved up that way and began to intermarry. Then the dark colors became predominant. But even today in that part of the world, there are many throwbacks that are blondes, and red hairs are not uncommon. And the people know where it comes from because it was so common so many years ago. So this is another amazing thing about their appearance. But Sudi said that they were both red-haired, but that John the Baptist was fiery red hair, and it fit his personality because he was much more outgoing and demonstrative than his cousin, Jesus. And he said Jesus was quiet, and he he'd look at you, he said, with these eyes, and you knew he knew so much. And he said in one of the sessions, Sadi said, how can I teach someone who knows more than I do? He said because he would bring up a principle of law that he was supposed to be teaching them. And he said Jesus could interpret it in a way that he had never heard of before, a way that was much more fair than what the laws had taught them. And he said, how do I teach someone who knows more than I do and is able to interpret it so exactly? And he learned so quickly. So he was there with Sadi at Qumran until he was around 13. When by that time he had finished all of the studies and he had learned everything that the Essenes could teach them. And by learning everything, what only the masters could teach was how to cure illnesses, how to cure the sick, and how to raise the dead. They said when you finally finished all that could be taught there, the final thing would be learning how to raise the dead. So this is where he got a lot of his training. Now, a lot of people in the church don't want you to know that. They like you to think he just came from the hills one day with all of this knowledge and began to practice it and was never taught by anyone. But I found out the opposite was true. Now, there is a long period of missing years in the life of Jesus that are never explained in the Bible. They just call them the missing years. But I found out where he went and what he did during those missing years. His uncle was Joseph of Arimithea. Now, in the Bible, he's only mentioned just briefly as a rich man who gave the tomb to Jesus, to bury Jesus' body in after the crucifixion. That's the only mention they have of Joseph of Arimithea in the Bible. but he was a very, very important person in that time period. And he was Jesus' uncle. He was related to Mary on her side. This man, Joseph of Arimithea, was one of the richest people in the world, highly respected. He had huge fleets of ships, and he was very much into mostly tin. And there were tin mines in England, especially, that he would take the fleets of ships and go to England, accumulate the tin, and then trade it all over the world. And in those days, tin was such a valuable metal that it would be the equivalent of a Rockefeller today. He was dealing in huge numbers of money. He was extremely rich. So this man was very respected during that time period when Jesus was alive over there because of his wealth. The Romans respected him. No one would go against him because he was so rich. And he kept his sources of tin a secret, because if anyone found where he was going in England to get the sources of tin, they would have done the same thing. So it was all kept secret at that time, and he was trading tin all over the world. So what he did was take Jesus on some of these trips with him. And whenever Jesus was young, Mary would also go on these trips. And it would be just under the disguise of he's going on a trading mission to the different countries, and he took Jesus along just for the adventure, just for the trip. But that was not the real reason for taking him on these trips when he was going to the various countries. Because in each one of these countries that Joseph of Arimithea went to, he had Jesus learn from the wisest teachers. So Jesus was trained by the wisest teachers in the known world at that time. All of the people who had the accumulation of knowledge, huge amounts of knowledge, and he was able to absorb it so quickly. All of this knowledge he was able to learn. So it was not only the Essenes, he was going back and forth, learning from the Essenes, and then learning from the other teachers in India, China, all of the known world, and accumulating all of this vast knowledge. In one of the groups that he learned from were the Druids in England. They were very close friends with Joseph of Arimithea. And they said at that time, around Glastonbury, they had a university that was one of the largest and most educated universities in the world at that time. All types of information was taught there. Later, the Romans tried to make people think that the Druids were barbaric and did sacrifices. That was not true. They were highly educated, just like the Essenes were, with a tremendous amount of knowledge and information. People came from everywhere to learn from these people. And they had their headquarters outside of Glastonbury in England. And the university was very large and very powerful. And so Jesus learned from the Druids. This is one of the main people that taught him. I'm not going to have time tonight to go into the entire story, but as I went through the stories and then I did my research later, many, many books were to me, especially from England, of the legends and the stories that have come down of that part of the world when Jesus was visiting there. And I found that that is where the first church in the world was established, at Glastonbury.